Welcome, friends. I'm Mike McMahon. I'm Executive Director of the Hymn Society. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this session on history. And to introduce our presenters today is our President-elect, Ben Brody. Take it away, Ben.
Good morning, friends. As Mike said, I'm Ben Brody. I'm President-elect of the Hymn Society. A reminder that participants are not able to be seen or heard, but you can make comments or ask questions through the chat or the Q&A features. And we'll be monitoring those comments or questions throughout the session, and we'll present some of those to the speakers at the conclusion of the talk. I'm happy to welcome you to this session, which will include video reflections on the history of the Hymn Society. Margaret Leask, soon to be a fellow of the Hymn Society, and Paul Richardson, fellow of the Hymn Society, are no strangers to many of us. Margaret is a hymnological researcher, former member of the editorial advisory board for the hymn, and is National Archivist for the Royal Canadian College of Organists. Paul is retired professor of music at Samford University and is currently working with Michael Hahn on a new edition of the hymnology textbook, Sing with Understanding. Paul and Margaret have been working together on the official history of the Hymn Society, which is slated to be released in 2022 to coincide with the centennial of our organization. So now I'm happy to welcome Margaret and Paul, who will lead us in discussion around their work.
Welcome, friends. I'm Paul. We're glad to have you collaborate in any part of our history, and we're glad to have you with us today as we hear from some favorite people. The Hymn Society has always been as much about relationships as common interests, and that's been true from the first meeting of the founding five and the four who were invited but could not come. The early members met roughly once a month and had an annual business meeting. Each May, they shared a day out, hosted for many years by Emily Perkins at her estate. They made quite a day of it, with presentations, a meal, a walk in the gardens, and worship at Riverdale Presbyterian Church. That pattern continued for about a half a century with occasional variations. However, much changed around the Society's reorganization in 1976. An annual gathering, first called a convocation, later a conference, has taken place every year with one exception since 1975. These conferences have done all the things one would hope for. They've also provided memorable experiences ranging from high musical and spiritual moments to brief and uncomfortable sleep. Today, we hear from folk who have provided the elbow grease that has enabled this machine to function. Margaret and I will briefly introduce them and remind you of the education and experience they brought to their roles. After each video, we'll take a couple of minutes to share whatever memories you have from those years, which you can put in the chat box. After the last clip, we'll make the discussion broader. We will be done at about an hour. Now, it is my duty to alert some of you who may have particular sensibilities. Please consider this your warning if you're triggered by mentions of motorcycles, pillows, and/or accordions. Margaret?
Thank you very much, Paul. Welcome, everybody, to the session. So, it's my privilege and pleasure to introduce Thomas Smith. He came to us in 1975-76, having been at the conference in Wittenberg in 1975. His education was at Stetson University in Florida, Syracuse University, Westphalia Church Music School in Herford, Germany, and the Wittenberg University. He was a chaplain's assistant for a couple of years, and then he became organist and choir director at Lutheran churches. He taught organ and hymnology at Wittenberg and hymnology at Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, Texas. He was a member of the American Guild of Organists, the Association of Lutheran Church Musicians, and the Choristers Guild. With Robert Battistini at GIA, he compiled and edited a collection of hymns organized according to the lectionary, Hymns for the Gospels, 2001. He became a fellow of the Hymn Society in 1996. His work
Greetings from Oaxaca, Mexico, my home since 1996. This is Tom Smith. I served as your executive director from 1977 to 1996. I thank each of you for your assistance and advice. Much was needed in that time of transition. In 1977, under the supervision of L. David Miller, the Hymn Society was moved to Wittenberg University in Springfield, Ohio, where he was the director of the School of Music. The Hymn Society remained in Wittenberg until 1984, when it moved to Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, Texas. During those years, the Hymn Society became the Hymn Society of the United States and Canada. It was a time of great growth and success. Of course, appreciation is expressed to all members of the society. I consider all members to be advisors, and indeed, you are. Someone suggested that we continue our work with many denominational worship and music organizations, with the American Guild of Organists and Canadian Guild of Church Music. As a result, we individually or together sponsored workshops, hymn festivals, and participation in annual conferences. Great growth in Hymn Society membership. I want to emphasize the importance of each Hymn Society member as an advisor. Your ideas led us during the 19 years of my service. I am sure that you continue to offer advice. This is especially necessary in this time of transition in all of the world. The future depends on each member's support and advice. I thank each member of the Hymn Society for the opportunity to serve as executive director for 19 happy and successful years. My current life is happy and healthy. I teach English about 20 hours a week in my home. It is a wonderful way to meet many local people, to improve my English, and to develop friendships. Many friends from various countries visit me here. Think about it. Contact me at jsboax@yahoo.com. Again, thanks to all of you for continuing to support the Hymn Society. The future is yours.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's wonderful to see you. So we have some follow-up. One of the things is to ask if you're aware of, think of the conferences that he covered. Chicago, 1977, Winston-Salem, 1978, and forward to Dallas, Fort Worth, Princeton, Atlanta, Springfield, Elmhurst, Bethlehem, Toronto, Fort Worth, Bryn Mawr, Grand Rapids, Charleston, Northfield, Washington, D.C., Toronto, Maryville, San Diego, and Oberlin. It's an extraordinary leadership for the Hymn Society as it was developing and growing after its reorganization. So, comments from the group. What do you remember about your conferences with Thomas Smith? I think I saw that Michael Hahn remembers playing the ukulele or the accordion. I saw half of it. That's become a trademark. Has anyone else got questions or thoughts about those years after the reorganization of the Hymn Society in 1975?
I see comments from people who are glad to see Tom, and I'm one of them. We have encouraged him to be with us, but he has been very happy in his home in Mexico, and we're glad to have him visually at this conference. For many of us, he was the first person we met who gave a face to the Hymn Society, and it always presented us in a good light.
I agree. Second the motion. So I think we will give you some time to remember. We can come up with some comments at the end of the hour today. Over to you, Paul.
And at any point, you can put them in the chat box. Our next executive director was Carl Dahl. Though I have visited his birthplace, that's entirely another story. Carl earned an undergraduate degree from Rice University and MA and PhD degrees in English from the University of Virginia. He taught at the College of William and Mary before going to the University of the South for his Master of Divinity degree. Ordained as an Episcopal priest, he served a parish in Petersburg, Virginia, and served on the text committee for the hymnal 1982, and that launched his work as a hymn writer. He subsequently was vicar chaplain at the University of Connecticut, then a member of the Community of Celebration. It was during that time that he was elected to the Hymn Society's Executive Committee, from which he resigned to apply for the position of Executive Director. Carl is the only Executive Director to have been honored in the very original Latin of the Minnesota people. He's also the only Executive Director, and perhaps the only member of any kind, to be informed at a conference that he was not dead. Let's see Carl's presentation.
Hello, I'm Carl Dahl. I served as the Executive Director of the Hymn Society from 1996 through 2009, and I've been asked to say something to you about annual conferences during that time. Clearly, with 13 different conferences to talk about, it's difficult to say much about any one conference in particular. So I'd like to begin with giving you a hint about some of the general considerations. If you have examined the list of annual conferences that usually appears in the conference booklet, you may have noticed that we hardly ever have met in the same place more than once. This is intentional so that we can move around the United States and Canada enough for people to learn about us because of our conferences. But because it's a new place every time, this means that there needs to be a site visit 2 or 3 years ahead of time to judge whether the facility, the dormitories, and the other things are going to meet our needs. Also, we have to have every conference program note set from scratch, because we don't simply repeat or recopy things as they appear in a hymnal. We want to have a booklet that has a uniformity of presentation. And no executive director can do a conference by him or herself. It takes a lot of cooperation from the executive committee, from a local committee, and from the very limited Hymn Society staff. In my case, I had the wonderful assistance of Mark Meyer, and then during the actual conference, he was assisted by his wife, Virginia, especially with registration, and my wife, May, did the bookstore in every one of those conferences. This was an enormous help. But in addition to all these general considerations, I want to talk about one particular conference just to give you a bit of the flavor of an annual conference during that time. In 2002, we had our annual conference at Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. This was our largest conference ever. 426 people were registered. And our theme for the conference was celebrating the local voice in congregational song. There are several things about this conference that made it special, but I will talk about only two of them in particular. Because we were near one of the central points of the organization of the Moravian Church in the United States, we had the wonderful opportunity to attend an Easter morning sunrise service that the Moravians staged for us at Home Moravian Church in Old Salem. Now, you wouldn't believe it, maybe, but we actually got an entire conference of Hymn Society people to an activity that began at 6:45 a.m. I didn't think it could happen, but it really did. And we began with a service in the actual church sanctuary, and then we marched down the street with brass bands on either side of us to the cemetery. And it's a marvelous thing to stand in a cemetery and hear the message of resurrection. Be reminded that all these dead in Christ will rise again. And then we were served a marvelous breakfast in the parish hall. Another thing that was wonderful about that conference was that we had a progressive dinner and hymn sing. There were 4 churches in Winston-Salem that were all along the same street. And so we began at one church with hors d'oeuvres, and then we went into their sanctuary, and their choir led us in the favorite hymns of that congregation. One of the things that happened several times in the course of this particular event is that when the local choir had done, say, one stanza of a hymn, and then we were all supposed to join in, you could see the heads of the choir members sort of snap when they suddenly found they were surrounded by a congregation that sang the way a hymn society conference sings. They weren't used to that kind of singing. But we had first an hors d'oeuvre and then a hymn sing, and then we had a salad and a hymn sing, then we had an entree and a hymn sing, and then we had a dessert, and we ended the evening with the service of Carlton at the Episcopal Church. And we had a wonderful experience of how each local congregation really does have a voice in its congregational song. And this is so true to the experience of what all the rest of us have known through our lives. The other thing that may have been particularly important about that hymn conference is that, as was our custom, we had the introduction of an emerging text writer. And that text writer that year was Mary Louise Bringle. And now, in this year, 2020, Mel Bringle is being named as a Fellow of the Hymn Society. And our emerging tune writer that year was Thomas Pavlevsko. And Tom has gone on to make many contributions. And so that's another part of what a conference does. It not only celebrates the local voice, but it identifies those who give leadership to congregational song for both the United States and Canada. Thank you.
I've been pleased to see your chats as you have remembered particular moments during the years that Carl led us, and especially the Winston-Salem Conference. I was glad to have known Mel Bringle in her chrysalic years. Please continue to add comments as you will. The time during Tom's being executive director also included our 75th anniversary, which took place in Savannah. And I know that many of you were there for some unique opportunities. And there's Nova Scotia mentioned. I hope all of you will continue to follow the chats because our memories are stimulating one another. This is helpful to Margaret and me as we are both reminded of things that we remember and reminded of things that we need to look up. Margaret?
Yes. It's an ongoing story that keeps unfolding. It's a lot of fun. It's my pleasure to introduce Deborah Carlton Loftis. She doesn't need any introduction. But for all of us who know her and have known her so long, here's the basic background. She's a graduate of Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina, with a BA in history and a Master of Church Music at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, where she wrote a thesis on the hymns of Georgia Harkness. In 1988, she received a PhD in musicology from the Joint Degree Program of the University of Kentucky, Lexington, Kentucky, and the University of Louisville. Her doctoral dissertation studied the history, ethnic identity, and musical style of Southern harmony. See William Walker. The singers of Southern harmony in the Kentucky area. In 1991, to top things off, she added a Master of Library Service from the University of Alabama. In her career, she is a music cataloger, a reference librarian. She has taught music and church music programs at Samford University in Birmingham, at McAfee School of Theology, and at the Baptist Theological Seminary in Richmond. She's been a minister or associate minister of music. She's also an ordained Baptist minister. Mel Bringle has said to her in the entry in the Canterbury Dictionary of Hymnology, at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, a course under Hugh McElraith inspired her to choose hymnody as a primary academic and vocational trade. Imagine. I think Hugh McElraith did that for a lot of people. The choice was further solidified by lectures by Donald Husted regarding the significance of the hymnody in Christian worship. Powerhouses in the Hymn Society. Loftis joined the Hymn Society of America, later identified as the Hymn Society in the United States and Canada, while in graduate school, and served as a contributing editor for the quarterly journal, The Hymn, from 1979 to 2011. In 2009, she became the executive director of the Hymn Society. She retired in 2017 after a successful capital campaign that assured the financial security, and she added professional staff leadership for the newly formed Center for Congregational Song, who will come a little later this morning. We give thanks for Deb's wonderful leadership.
Hi, I'm Deb Loftis, and I was honored to serve as your executive director from the fall of 2019 through the spring of 2017. When I was asked to make a video about my most memorable conference, the thing that immediately sprang to mind was the first conference I led in 2010 at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama. My predecessor, Carlton, had tried to prepare me as best he could for how to lead the conference and how to be in touch with the university where we would be having our conference. And there were a list of questions to ask, and I thought, some of these questions are strange, Carl. And he said, well, yes, you see, every year there's a surprise. Something comes out of left field that we had never thought about, and then suddenly we have to deal with it. And so it goes on the list of questions to ask in subsequent years. Well, I certainly had my surprise. In the spring, I was in conversation with Samford officials and found out that Samford didn't provide linens for the conference. And almost accidentally in that conversation, there was a mention that they also didn't provide pillows. Well, I got busy online and found someplace to rent towels and sheets and got all of that taken care of, but I couldn't find anywhere that would provide pillows. So somewhat to my consternation at an extra conference expense, I found myself searching online again to purchase pillows. 250 pillows. Luckily, Walmart had a great deal. I was able to order them in Richmond and have them delivered to a Walmart in Birmingham. And my good friend, Paul Richardson, and longtime member of the Hymn Society, agreed to go and pick them up. The first surprise was that the pillows were delivered to a cardboard carton. Yes, 125 cardboard cartons. I think it took Paul 15 trips to pick up the pillows and take them to his house and then store them for a month or so, and then 15 trips to get them to campus. Paul and I are still friends, by the way. On the day that we gathered, we were not able to get into the dorm rooms early. I tried to get Samford to let me go in and put the linens and the pillows on each bed. Oh no, you can't go in early. The linens and the pillows can be delivered to the entrance hallway in each dormitory, but that's as far as it goes. On Saturday, when the executive committee and the other members of the staff and I were able finally to get into rooms, we discovered, much to our horror, that all the beds were lofted. They were 4.5 feet off the ground. I had to stand in a chair and climb into the bed, and I was totally unnerved about the idea of our older members trying to get in or out of the bed. My calls to the Samford Housing Office met with a rather stony resistance that that's the way they were. And I said, you need to consider what your liability will be if one of my 80-year-old Hymn Society members is injured getting in or out of that bed. They said, well, okay, we'll lower the beds for the people that need them, but don't move those beds. Thankfully, some of our younger Hymn Society members paid no attention whatsoever to that instruction and lowered lots of beds on Sunday night for people. But I was still worried about the beds when I kept getting messages that there were no pillows. Where are the pillows? I can't find a pillow. And I thought, I bought plenty of pillows. There should be pillows and extra. But we had to figure something out. So on Monday morning, my first Monday morning announcements for the Hymn Society, and I'm talking about lofted beds and then pillows. If you inadvertently picked up more than one pillow when you were getting your linens, would you please just take your pillow and extra pillow and put it back in the hallway? No questions asked. I was trying to be lighthearted and not be scolding about this, and everybody took it in a good humor. But it became the joke of the week, pillow amnesty. Well, we finally got the beds lowered. We got the pillows sorted out. The rest of the week went smoothly. You'll be glad to know that at the end of the conference, folks who came in a car took lots of pillows home to homeless shelters, and the few remaining pillows that were still in Birmingham were delivered to several shelters there. So the pillows all went to good use beyond the 4 days of the conference. And you also should know that that list of questions for possible conference locations from that time on included, are the beds lofted? And do you provide pillows?
Thank you very much, Deb. We will follow with any comments that people might want to put up right now. Are there any more questions? There's wonderful memories being triggered by this.
I'm intrigued to learn that Glenn and Judy still have their pillows.
Important memorabilia. And I didn't get to Stanford, which I would love to have done, but boy, did I hear about those pillows. So others, memories of conferences, there are wonderful stories. Hymn Society is exceptional at storytelling. So carry on. We're looking forward to hearing from you. And now maybe we'll move next to Paul.
Jan Kraybill earned degrees from Kansas State University in music education and piano before receiving her Doctor of Musical Arts degree from the University of Missouri of Kansas City. She was awarded the Fellowship of the American Guild of Organists for her skill at the console, and her proficiency with the brain earned her membership in Mensa. She was and is organist in residence at the international headquarters of the Community of Christ in Independence, Missouri, and organ conservator at the Kaufman Center for the Performing Arts in Kansas City. She's performed widely and recorded CDs of solo literature and with orchestra. Before she was named executive director in 2017, she had served on the executive committee and was one of our leaders at the joint meeting of hymn societies in Cambridge in 2015. Let's hear from Jan.
Hi, I'm Jan Kraybill, and I was the executive director of the Hymn Society preceding Mike McMahon. My favorite conference memory is hard to define because I have so many conference memories, but I guess my favorite one is from my very first conference because it set me on a path that I could not have imagined then. It was in 1999 in Vancouver, British Columbia. I was there because my colleagues, new colleagues at Community of Christ, which was then called RLDS, they had just hired me to be their principal organist, and they insisted that I had to attend Hymn Society conference that very next year. I had never heard of the Hymn Society, but they had been members for years, and they just insisted I had to be there. As I read the conference description, I really didn't understand what it would have to do with me as an organist, because there wasn't an organ focus that year, and I didn't know what Hymn Society was. I thought maybe they were never focused on leading congregational song from the pipe organ. But because my new colleagues insisted and I wanted to make a good impression on them, I showed up in Vancouver and my life was changed. I remember so many things about that conference, and I hate to list any of them, but I just have to. Morning prayers led by Mary Oyer. Oh my gosh, amazing, amazing. It was just so wonderful to hear my colleagues in song led by a person who was well-versed in leading congregational song without benefit of an instrument other than the human voices around her. That was amazing. And then the focus on international global song that year. How fortunate was I to be there and to be introduced to people that I had never heard of before. People like Ito Lo and Patrick Madsen-Kingiri and Pablo Sosa. And then people that I had known from the bottom of hymnal pages, but I didn't know as people, like Carl Daw, then the executive director of the Hymn Society, and Michael Hahn, who introduced me to the concept of accordion ministry. Life-changing, life-changing. And then we all have Hymn Society moments. My first Hymn Society moment, unexpected, was during a salmon dinner on the lawn of the First Nations Longhouse when I met Austin Lovelace, who informed me that he had played at the wedding of my mentor, John Obetz. And we had a lovely, lovely conversation. Any of you who knew Austin know that every conversation with him was uplifting and lovely. So that conference, I got the Hymn Society bug, and I haven't missed a conference since. And there are so many conference memories and so many other memories that, as I said, I never could have imagined that year in 1999 in Vancouver. I never imagined that I would serve on the executive committee of the Hymn Society. I never imagined that I would ever serve as its executive director. Both of those were privileges and pleasures that I will remember forever. And of course, other conference memories. So just so you know, here are my others that eventually didn't make the list when I had to pick a favorite. But my goodness, 2001 in Independence, in my home territory, at Community of Christ. My goodness, to hear our halls and our worship spaces filled with the voices of the Hymn Society. I'll never forget that. And then in 2002, when I got to hear one of the results of our gathering there, when Mel Bringle introduced her text, Light Dawns on a Weary World, with a tune by Bill Rowan that was named Temple of Peace after the temple in Independence. Wow, I was in tears. I'm always in tears. If you know me, I'm always in tears at Hymn Society conferences. And then 2003 in Halifax, Nova Scotia, when my husband and I took the challenge set by the Bewleys, who always rode their motorcycle to Hymn Society conferences. They had ridden from Canada to Independence, and so they challenged us to ride our motorcycles to their home territory. And we had a great time, except that it rained every single day, but that's okay. We had a great time anyway. And then another Canadian conference in Winnipeg when we started to formulate the dreams together that eventually ended up in the creation of the Center for Congregational Song. And then in Columbus, Ohio in 2014, I got to help introduce a new hymnal that I had served on the hymnal team to create, Community of Christ Sings. To hear my Hymn Society colleagues responding well to that hymnal and singing the pieces that we had slaved over to put in that hymnal, there's nothing like that. And up to last year in 2019 in Dallas, when I got to help lead a a Hymn Society Hymn Festival at the Meyerson Center with that glorious organ. So the Hymn Society is all about all of those things, and that's what I love. Every conference is different. This conference in 2020 is different. I just can't wait to see what the future holds for us all. Thanks for letting me share some of these memories.
Thank you, Jan. I think it's interesting how much Jan's experience at conferences encouraged her to become our executive director. I'm glad to see other comments arriving. Several of you have been reminded about Austin Lovelace, who was a faithful president and present at our conferences for many years. I'll put in another plug here to contribute to the Lovelace Scholarship Fund. That's what enables our folks who are in graduate programs to come. It was first initiated in order to help those from the EAHA come to attend the conference in Bethlehem in 1985 because they were unable to bring cash outside what was then the Iron Curtain. My last memory of Austin was just before the conference at Birmingham in 2010. He had found that he was terminally ill, and he called and left the nicest, most encouraging message on my phone to say that he regretted he would not be able to come to Birmingham. That was Austin encouraging from first to last. Please continue to post your memories. Margaret? You're muted, Margaret.
Now I think I'm together again. Yes?
Yes.
Good. Thank you. I have the pleasure of introducing Brian Hayne, who is our Director of Center for Congregational Song and an extraordinarily hardworking member of the team for this conference. As many of you know, Brian has been with Hymn Society for some time, always leading and always able to find a way to get something done. It's marvelous. He studied at Wingate University in North Carolina, a Bachelor of Music Education. He studied at Perkins School of Theology at the Southern Methodist University for a Master of Sacred Music. He also has his full credentials with Choristers Guild to teach children's church music. And did you know that he's published a collection called All Hands in Drumming, the Biblical Narrative, by the Choristers Guild? It's a great delight to have Brian with us, and over to you, Brian.
Hey, so this is my response to Paul's and Margaret's request for us to share our, I guess, most distinct or most important or most just memorable conference experience. And I've had many, some good and some bad, you know. You just have to roll with the punches when you're running the conference and smile and carry on. I could talk about this year, but I'm not, because we're still in the midst of it. And so there might be a better memory yet to come over the next 3 weeks. So I would say my most memorable conference experience was in New Orleans, before I was on staff, but when I was named the director of the Center for Congregational Song. Of course, I knew that I was going to be named the director before most other people, because they had to offer me the position. And so there was a lot of anticipation and angst leading to that moment. But it didn't hit me until I was standing there and everyone was applauding and they stood up. And I looked out at the Hymn Society and I saw people like Michael Hahn, my mentor. Deb was standing there on stage with me. I saw Jimmy Abingdon and John Thornburg. I saw fellows of the Hymn Society popping out of this crowd. And I saw my peers who were cheering me on and were excited for me. And it was that moment that I realized how important this work was and how lucky I was to be in that moment. And I was overwhelmed with gratitude, with responsibility to represent the society well. And it was a moment I'll never forget. And then the following few days of everyone just patting me on the back and saying, let me know how I can help. That was the number one refrain that I heard for the next 6 months. Let me know how I can help. And that was really, really meaningful. So that was my most important conference memory.
Thank you, Brian. So others will have plenty of memories of Brian and of the conferences that he has led. Are there any further comments? We're seeing many accolades showing up. It's a tough job. That wonderful gift to listen and also to lead. Any other comments that you would like to bring forward? Okay, over to you, Paul.
Let me encourage you, if you have questions, to put them in the Q&A box. I don't know that Margaret and I can answer them other than from what memories we have, but some of the folks who've been responsible for these conferences are taking part in this session, and they may be able to remind us all or explain something that we never quite understood. Mike McMahon holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Pittsburgh. He has master's degrees from Washington Theological Union and the University of Notre Dame, and he received the Doctor of Ministry degree from Catholic University of America. He served Roman Catholic parishes in the Washington metropolitan area, and for 12 years he was president and chief operating officer of the National Association of Pastoral Musicians. He came to the Hymn Society post from National City Christian Church, a Disciples of Christ congregation in Washington, where he was minister of music. He's ordained in that tradition. For those of you with longer memories, Mike appeared on the conference program in 1992 when we met in the district. And here are his recent memories.
When Paul Richardson and Margaret Leask invited us to recall our most memorable annual conference, they speculated that Brian Hayne and I might choose this year's conference because of its unique nature and challenges. I don't know where Brian will land on that question, but I'm going to take advantage of the opening that Paul and Margaret have given us and speak for a few moments about the historic annual conference at which we are now gathered. While last year's conference in Dallas was the first at which I participated as executive director, this year's conference is the first one in which I have been engaged at every step, from the beginning of the planning process. So I suspected that it would be special for me, but little could I have known just how special. My memory of this year's conference will always include the backdrop against which we are meeting, beginning with the recent police killings of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. These terrible crimes have exposed yet again the systemic racism in our society and have ignited a wave of protests unlike any that I can recall since 1968. For me, this 2020 conference will always be associated with the movement to affirm Black lives and to engage in the work of anti-racism. This year's conference also takes place in the context of a pandemic that has infected millions, killed hundreds of thousands, and has led to severe hardships for the most vulnerable among us. It also, of course, derailed our plans to hold an in-person conference in Atlanta, and I'm forming memories of how we have been responding as an organization, as a staff, and as leaders, creators, and lovers of song. The decision of the executive committee to move the conference to a digital platform has unleashed an amazing process of planning, learning, consulting, creating, and connecting that I will remember for years to come. I'm going to remember how Brian became a wizard of directing and editing videos, how Courtney reinvented our entire registration process on a dime, and how Stephen created really attractive and user-friendly web pages to steer people through this new way of conferencing. This year's event will be remembered in the history of the Hymn Society as our first digital conference. I will remember it as an experience of creativity, teamwork, and connection. And for that, I'm deeply grateful.
I wish we'd had the church lady to tell us how special this year's conference was. We're certainly grateful to Brian and Mike and to all of those who have enabled it to take place. All of these memories, however, remind us of how important it is to be together. And as grateful as I am for what's happening this year, I look forward to being with you next year. So I hope you'll put that on your agenda. I hope that all the triggers from this meeting were positive. And I'm thinking that maybe next year we should prepare a video of the favorite announcements of every executive director. Margaret, what can people do to help us?
You can join us on Thursday, the 23rd of July. We're going to have a follow-up Zoom chat. So think about what you've heard. You're welcome to join us at 7:30 on July 23rd. In the meantime, send us emails, send us pictures. We would love pictures of the book. Little anecdotes. And what mattered most to you? What has mattered most to you about being a part of the Hymn Society? Where do you think we're going? Give us some feedback on your stories about the Hymn Society. This is a book for all of us, so we will make it together.
Margaret and I want to thank the executive directors and Brian for all responding to our request. They had plenty to do. They made time for this. I think it's been valuable for all of us. You may want to watch this session again. And please do join Margaret and me on the 23rd if you'd like to be part of a conversation. In the meantime, send us your memories, your questions. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.